Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Commission Breath. Brandon Love here with Tom Moffat and a very special guest, Paul Davidescu. Paul is from the podcast Grind Less, Flow More. He's also a mortgage broker based out of Vancouver, British Columbia. And today we are going to do a deep dive on hiring, growing teams, and everything that comes along with that. So thanks for joining us, Paul.
Tom and Brandon, thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Awesome. Yeah. So I originally reached out to you, Paul, with the intention of talking about podcasting because I've tuned into your podcast. I love what you're doing. And you're like, you know what? I think your listeners would really get value out of scaling your business through hiring and delegating. So I'm like, you know what? We haven't really done an episode specifically on that. So that's why we brought you here. So why don't we just start off by just kind of getting some background, the lay of the land as to how you got into the industry, where you're at today, and kind of the road, the journey along the way there.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for that setup. Well, in a nutshell, I've spent the last 15 years thinking about how do you help entrepreneurs grind less and flow more? How do you help them make sustainable income? So, what's sustainable income? Well, we see it as something that was popularized way back in the day in a book that I think most entrepreneurs read as their first, The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. He talks about relative income. So he talks about it doesn't really matter how much money you make at the end of the year. It's about the profit, not the revenue, obviously, but also it's the amount of time you put into that. So it's profit relative to time. So it's the efficiency of how you make money. And one thing we like to add on to that is, well, how optimized is that? Are you tracking it? And lastly, do you have maximum happiness and zero burnout? Can you strive towards that? Because I think, especially after COVID, there was an awakening. Values shifted a little bit. And yeah, there's more to life than just making money. So I've done that in multiple ways, and we'll get into it. But yeah, just background story on me. Born in Mexico City. I moved to Vancouver when I was 4, grew up on the west side, went to UBC, and I have a third passport from Spain. So very international, and I think that that's important for obviously how I run my business and the different ideas and the ways I put some soul into sometimes a soulless industry. Yeah, like professionally, I mean, really like I guess my 50 minutes of fame was Dragon's Den in 2014. We were at the time working on a tech company that built a pocket concierge for people to choose their favorite restaurant based off a mood that they're in. So think Spotify meets Yelp. And yeah, that was a really cool experience. And spoiler alert, we did get funding, but not in the way you may think. And we can save that for another day. Then evolved into a marketing agency. So social media and sales automation. That was in 2016 that we sort of evolved into that. Still working with restaurants. And when I moved to Toronto in 2018 I think it was just to feel less stuck. I was in the same environment for so long. I took Vancouver for granted, I know. And when you go somewhere else, especially like Toronto, great city, but not the exact same kind of beauty or community. Things started to shift a bit. But the cool thing about changing your environment is when you are somewhere new like that, where it's a lot colder, both arguably, physically and metaphorically, you get shocked out of your system and new opportunities come to you. So that's when I started meeting a lot of mortgage brokers. I didn't really know what a mortgage broker was back then. Honestly, it was just like, as an entrepreneur, it's the last thing you think about. Home ownership, great. Maybe one day. I mean, I think that's a sentiment anywhere, right? But especially as an entrepreneur, you're thinking, you're thinking about the house over your head, which is the place that you rent, and the staff that you have on board. And met a lot of mortgage brokers, and they started expressing needs around better marketing themselves. And it was just an opportunity that I guess had to make sense to explore. This was like a couple of years before COVID, or really a year before COVID, that we started exploring and diversifying. And I mean, they always say if you can be empathetic to your customer, like that's how you win. Easier said than done. And working with restaurants, I had thought about opening like a small taco stand or something and doing some marketing on us and having it as a case study. Never quite had that align, but in Toronto, at least at the time, I could do that. At the same time, I found out that you can get certified within 1 week, right, through a full-time course. And at that point, I actually had the freedom to do that. And this is going to go back to our theme around staff. I had hired literally, he went from an apprentice to a co-founder, Santiago. Awesome dude. really smart guy. And I told him, hey, keep running with the company. I'm going to do this covert mission and get my broker license so that I can be the Trojan horse case study for us. I'm going to get the license just for fun. I mean, it's probably good to learn how to eventually strive for home ownership. But really, if I can be our first customer, and we can experiment with me, and I can be very patient, and you can give me lots of resources, then that could be a good start. We did that, and we got lucky. We timed it with, well, it got timed with the bottom of the interest rates, COVID, and just applied a certain set of sales systems, and I call them systems of giving, and just this growth mindset, which we talk a lot about on the podcast. And yeah, we got nominated for newcomer of the year across Canada, and then suddenly we had to work more with mortgage brokers. It was just what the market wanted. And then me personally, my dollar per hour, my relative income shot through the roof, 12x. And as much as I didn't find this to be as sexy as restaurants, it was just clear that there was a need there. And yeah, I dove headfirst into being a mortgage broker, and haven't looked back since. I mean, at the same time, my agency still exists. Santiago runs it, so we've got a portfolio of brands we have under this brand. I mean, called Level Up Advisors. That's kind of our corporation, and the whole goal, back to what I said, is how do you help people build sustainable income? And that doesn't just come from being a broker. It comes from being a good marketer. It comes from health. It comes from a lot of different things that, yeah, we present to a lot of our clients. So it's kind of a multifaceted thing. But my lane right now is pure mortgage brokering. We have a commercial arm, and we deal a lot with business owners, people that are especially burnt out, people that are especially, I think, making a big difference in the world, and they're just not getting the treatment or the understanding from banks, and even sometimes other brokers who need to speak their language and understand that their time is so precious, and they need lots of solutions, and they have no time. They're managing staff, contractors, etc. So that is a bit of a intro on my story, and here we are.
Nice. I totally feel your comment there about your relative hours shooting up through the roof with brokering. I feel like it's such a gateway drug when you look at it like, oh wow, okay, I can work 40 hours a week or even 25 or less in some scenarios and make hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you compare that to another industry. I was in farming before and working directly with restaurants, and there's not the value because there's not the margin in the industry. So it's harder to scale that way. And I think you touched on something there about brokers feeling burnt out at certain times. And I think a lot of other industries, there's arguably more burnout, but we sometimes get burnt out in the mortgage industry because we're constantly doing this similar scenarios, but different people, and working with people who are high stress on the other side of things. And that stress can kind of get transferred over. And a little reset I've been doing recently is just kind of thinking back to those old days of having to wake up at like 5 in the morning, go to the farm, finish the day late at night. And then I just had this like intense gratitude for where I'm actually at today and all the opportunities that this industry has opened up. And I found that like in times where I was feeling stretched thin or a little bit burnt out, that's been a huge frame to kind of reshift and then go back into the next day with that renewed energy.
So let's pivot to your first hire. So
Mhm.
if we're going back to, let's say, your marketing agency, you mentioned that you're still part of that business, right? So then is that fully off your plate at that point? Like your business partner is
Mhm.
handling that with other staffing, and then you're kind of just the front facing with lead gen, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, great question. So, when you run any business, it's very hard to be completely hands off, until it's really at a certain level. I'm there very strategically, and I think it's one big thing is letting go. So when I was going to go on this Toronto adventure, yes, to build the business in a bigger, brighter city. At least that's how I saw it at the time. When you leave, like, you're forced to delegate some things and not be in the weeds, or else you can't really think about things. So again, I started like for years. Like, there's so many amazing apprentices, interns, just young people who are not given a fair shot. And if you have the right leadership and the right story, and you really want to help them level up, you're gonna get a lot of people that want to contribute in some way. But yeah, I mean, you really got to find someone who can be an independent thinker and can have the right confidence, and you have to nurture that. And when you do that, you just start letting go of more and more things. And yes, ideally, you are the rainmaker and they are the operator. They understand pretty much the whole process. Ideally, that's documented somewhere, right? And yeah, when I was in Toronto, I was given the space to think, because otherwise I'd be in the weeds with customers 3 hours behind me, right? And that just becomes a bit of a, not ideal for again, flowing, to really having time to think and strategize and try new opportunities. So yeah, he was a full-time staff with a bit of equity, and then I just gave him more and more challenges and opportunities, and he sees it really well. And eventually, I was only really working a couple hours there, mainly just for sales meetings, things that really move the needle, things that improve not just my relative income, but also Santiago's and the teams. And that's how it is today. Still, I mean, there's still meetings I will jump in for. I really we have certain corporate cadences, weekly meetings, dailies. We follow the EOS framework. It's a
Yeah.
great way to run your company, no matter how small you are.
That's from Traction,
And
right?
that's it. Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
by Gino. Yep,
S
or Gino Wickman.
yeah, it's a great book. So if we're transitioning to the mortgage side of things, can you
Yep.
speak to your first hire and, like, what
Yep.
that role was, and if you would either change what you did or if you would recommend the same situation for the typical average broker that wants to make their first hire?
Yep. First hire for me, well, I had a bit of an unfair advantage. It was at Tangoo marketing agency. So they did all my marketing. And the first thing I would do really for hiring, and you can do some of this yourself, at least at the beginning, is really souping up your LinkedIn profile.
Okay.
Assuming you're going to go for realtors, which you guys have talked extensively on in previous episodes. That was a really great one. You got to have that front facing brand. And again, I think you can take a course to do some of that yourself. But at some point, things like inbox management, helping flag your DMs, even helping you sometimes, manage your inbox. That's kind of what the first assistant usually does, is they help you stay on top of communication. And they can sometimes even actually act like you and respond to basic email. So I feel like, look, like the name of the game here, you guys have talked about it extensively again, is communication, right? So if you're already on that stuff, then you might be like, Paul, I don't need someone to answer my email, at least not yet. You may go for the direction of getting like a fractional underwriter, which is I'd probably say for like most other cases, it's getting a fractional underwriter. So what does that mean? Well, let's actually break that down to the two positions. There's underwriting and fulfillment, right? The latter, no one really likes to do. It's the Form 10, and it's
Yeah.
when you got a deal closed, and it's like, why am I doing this? This is a complete waste of time. Um, and we're lucky at we're under Tangle Financial Group, which is part of M3, and they're innovators in the space. They are the ones who came up with a couple different like widely used platforms. I mean, Doc Assist at the time was very popular, and if you guys look at Lender Spotlight, that was made internally by by the Henneberry brothers. So essentially, they had these fractional underwriters that again, I don't know if every brokerage is going to have it, but what they did is it's called Tango Plus. Is they would assign to you. They had a full time 4 ladies. They're still going today. They're awesome. And yeah, they would do your compliance part, and they would fractionalize it for a few $100s, and then that was it, right? And they're very generous. They would actually step into the deal the second you get approved. They're not just doing the back
Wow,
end work, but I challenge them to even like handhold clients and help them,
yeah.
figure out their down payment verification, and they really go above and beyond. And for let's call it $400, and let's say that's usually 4 hours of work, not just the compliance package, but actually closing the deal, even talking to lenders. I mean, the dollar per hour, fine, it might become $100. But like that is like that's like $100, where it's not like you just do it all in 4 hours. It's like death by a thousand paper cuts.
Yeah.
The stress of having 3 or 4 or 5 deals on the go, each of a lender nitpicking one thing, and the client asking a certain question, and everyone being stressed. That is a stressful 4 hours that I am happy to
Yeah.
delegate and share some of my commission from. So that's, I think, if you have that luxury, it's a huge important hire. If you don't have that luxury, one thing that I've done, because of course there's limitations there. There's also the whole part where you're front facing, you're trying to get someone to get you all their documents, and you're nudging them along your pipeline to pre-approval, and you've got to do their FINMO application or whatever you're using, and even that at a certain volume becomes exhausting. So I hired a fractional assistant overseas, actually in Mexico City, my hometown, and I trained her to, just help me organize a lot of that. Of course, never saying she's a licensed broker, never giving advice, but
Right.
some client correspondence and teeing up a lot of those processes for me is very helpful. And again, like you should be doing all of this yourself and building a process because nothing's going to beat how you do it. But eventually, I mean, you can get some help to fill in the dots, and like this could literally be anywhere from $8 to $12 an hour, right? Grab someone for 5-10 hours, and as long as you know how to manage them, you're getting some time back to really do the most important thing: be great with clients, talk to your referral partners, and prospect. Because at the end of the day, this is a glorified sales role,
Yeah.
right? And it's you want to be a thoughtful salesperson. You don't want to feel like you're just a salesperson. That's of course another discussion. But yeah, I mean, I think a fractional assistant to help with the front end or the back end is like the first thing you should look at.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we had done as well in our business. We hired someone who basically, once the file is approved, she picks up the file, she submits all the docs to the lender, she follows up with the client for any missing pieces, does
Mhm.
compliance at the end, and we find it frees up so much time and mental bandwidth that way. And for
Okay.
people listening who don't have kind of that internal model that Paul has, there are independent contractors who do this as like a standalone business. So you just have to
Mhm.
know where to find them and see if they have the bandwidth to take that on. Uh,
Yep.
you, you talk a lot about fractional. I've heard you use
Mhm.
that phrase a few times. So why don't you go deep on the fractional side of things and where, like, are you just picking parts of your process that you feel you can delegate, building a
Mhm.
system for it, and handing it off? How do you determine what to allocate, the budget for that task, all those pieces?
Great question. So fractional is, as it infers, is not having a full time person, because like you need to be at a pretty good volume level to justify that. Although there's a fractional way to have a full time person. Some brokers share one underwriter, right?
Right.
Who's paid on a salary, etc. We haven't quite done that, but I've seen it been done. Yeah. So for us, it's who can at a 5, 10, 20 hour a week level, own something, completely own something, and give you peace of mind to do what you do best. Um, as I said, for me, I think as a broker, like your biggest duty that cannot be replaced or very hard to be replaced is you are the quiet confidence for clients to move forward with speed and conviction. So in other words, you're there to hold their hand. Really, like that is your role. Why are we hired as brokers by banks and monoline lenders and anyone else? Because unfortunately, they do not have the bandwidth to provide any level of service. And I'm just like, my blood boils when I just think about like how terrible an experience people get from banks primarily for no fault of their own. If you think of the way that they're built and the way they're incentivized and their corporate culture and just how understaffed they are. Like how many underwriters have burnt out at certain banks because they just got to figure out their shit basically, right? So that's our advantage where we again become these. I hate to say glorified salespeople, but I would say like glorified,
Technical sales.
this buffer. What's that?
I was gonna say glorified technical sales. Like you got to know the knowledge to
Correct.
be able to
Yeah.
advocate something. But at the end of the day, it is sales if you want to scale your business and do well.
Totally. And this
Yeah.
is with any business. So because of that, you need to be just you're kind of like their coach. And I really see me as a coach of my teams and my brands and my clients. You're giving them, and I call it educational sales. You're educating them in a non-pushy way. You're giving them data, and then you're also guiding them to keep moving forward. And they're gonna have all kinds of resistance, of course. Oh, I'm busy. Oh, there's that. There's a lot you have to unpack, and it's just about figuring out the art. For everyone's different and different customer journeys. How do you nudge them forward? And again, that's on you. But you cannot really do that with an empathetic mind and open heart if you are just stressed and slammed and doing things that do not fuel you. So again, like I try to focus as much as I am there to, of course, do the first intake call, of course, deal with my referral partners, build that important customer journey, and as you guys have said in previous episodes, like have that like really tight follow-up process with my referral partners. And like just it's about communication. I mean, in a nutshell, the biggest pain realtors have and the clients have with banks: no communication in the highest stress thing in their entire lives. People are just shocked. How can this be a standard when I'm just stressed? It's an opaque industry, and it seems like they don't care. And of course people care, but they're just busy, right? So you got to make people feel taken care of. And again, it's going to be different for everyone. But I think, yeah, you have to be just hand-holding the client. And if you can outsource everything else, where all you're doing is taking the intake meeting, checking in, answering questions, and then when it's a live deal, really, reviewing where they're going and how do you give them a better night's sleep? That's my line. That's what they want, right? So everything else you should have help on. And again, if in terms of budgeting, like think about it, right? Think about how much money you get to keep at the end of the year with taxes, and what are some of the costs here? Well, if there's a fractional assistant overseas at $10 an hour, 20 hours a week, that's 200 times 4, 800. Think about your rent, think about your other expenses. Does that make sense? Right. So you got to budget this, of course. But in terms of marketing, highest value that I see, and of course I have a bias, is if you can do biz dev and do some level of LinkedIn automation or prospecting with referral partners, and have the soft skill training to actually be on a call and confidently ask them the questions that make them really want to work with you. I mean, that's huge, right? And that's sustainable. And if you and I guess there's the like crossroads of lead gen or referral partner generation, and there's obviously I think a healthy mix. But look, like if you want to do lead gen on Google Ads or Facebook, like you need minimum $2,000 to make that work. Truly, right? I think, right? $1,000 for the contractor, $1,000 of ad spend, and then you got to be amazing on the phone and have the time to
Yeah.
chase people around. Which, by the way, maybe that comes later when you have a better process and assistant, etc. I mean, realtors, it's just organic. It's building relationships. It's technically not that expensive. I mean, you can figure it out yourself and go on LinkedIn and take some like really inexpensive course. And we have a course at our agency, Tangoo, all about prospecting on LinkedIn. And that was kind of, I guess, the course that I built by being the guinea pig. And I think that's obviously something that is probably a nice low hanging fruit, but depends on your personality.
Mhm.
Yeah, so if you're going that route, let's just we'll do a bit of a deep dive on the VAs. So I assume with
Let's do it.
your program and with LinkedIn and the strategies there, you have some sort of the automations done by someone overseas through VAs.
So a bit of both. So the automation, so the process there is there are some automations. I mean, one platform is called Meet Alfred. Someone that we partner with, and we've got an awesome promo code if you really want to use them. And they basically help you prospect a certain segment of realtors. So when I moved to Toronto, I didn't know a lot of people, so I actually went on the search bar, the free search bar on LinkedIn, and I said Toronto realtor, and then 1,000 people come up, 50,000 people technically, right, and counting, maybe even more in Toronto. And basically from there, there's a list, and then you can send them a drip campaign on that first intro message, and then like literally you can do 10 drip campaigns over 2 months or 3 months if you want. That can get extremely annoying, and I think people are very sensitive to automation. So even since 2019, things have changed, and beyond using that software, it's about $100 a month. We found the best conversion rates are actually when you do a personalized reach out, but that's tedious. And that's where you want to bring a VA, but are
Yeah.
they going to know the checklist that you go through mentally to do it properly? So what we've done recently is, yes, we're in the era of ChatGPT, and we found that if you can prompt ChatGPT to scan their profile and basically manually create that message that the automation does, but you do it really quickly, we found a lot of success of that. Kind of like basically it's a mix of artificial intelligence and just using your heart and your process. So there's a mix of pure automation with a very catch-all message that's like not salesy, of course. That's very general. And then there's a level of like, personalized reach out, which you should probably start doing yourself and, bang out 20 minutes in the morning with your coffee
Yeah.
and just do it, as tedious as that sounds. And eventually there's prompts you can do to then outsource to either ChatGPT or run it through ChatGPT. Or what we've done now is we have virtual assistants or fractional assistants, however you want to call them, that will follow a specific script, a specific process, and either use ChatGPT or their own intuition, with, of course, following a process. And that they'll spend the 1 or 2 hours a day doing very tedious tasks that are probably not worth your time, unless you're adding like a ridiculous amount of extra value. But if you got the process down, you shouldn't. You won't be that different than them, and that's a good tripwire to be like, if they can do it 80% as good as me, that's good enough. And a lot of
Yeah.
entrepreneurs talk about that exact line, like Dan Martell, who was on our podcast, a lot of people. So it's, you got to let go to some degree, and it's varies per person.
Yeah, I think that's the challenging part is sometimes you're like, "Oh, I do this thing well," and then you hand it off to an assistant or someone, and then you're like, "Oh, I wouldn't really do it that way." And we struggle with that. Sometimes we'll talk back and forth, but I'm like, "Did it get done? Is the end
Yeah.
goal there?"
Yes.
And we're like, yeah, it is. So
Yes.
definitely love that frame, and I think it's super important to remember and to constantly remind yourself of, because it's
Mm,
one of those things that everything you delegate, you kind of go through that struggle of, oh, well, I would do it a little bit differently this way. And for
mm,
people thinking about adding that LinkedIn layer, when we talk about like building the ask muscle and things like that in previous episodes, this is a great
mm,
opportunity for you to do that, to bang out your 5 to 10 opens per day, get those asks, try to meet those realtors, financial advisors, lawyers, whoever it might be that you're targeting. And you'll know from doing that sort of what works and what prompts you're
mhm,
using. And then
mhm.
from there, build and refine your system out of that.
Yeah, and I think that, the first thing I would do as a broker, whether you're brand new or, starting your strategy planning, is take a hard look at what is your niche and what makes you different.
Yeah.
And truly think about that. And unfortunately, saying I'm great at communication is not something that's marketable. That's more of a you got to walk the walk than talk it, because good communication can mean so many different things. And although that I think is the core value prop, you can't flaunt that. But things you can't flaunt and maybe put on your profile, like for me, we have commercial lending. People usually Google that stuff on LinkedIn, etc., and I get reach outs, and that's a very it's a categorical niche that's very specific, and that can work. If I put great communicating real mortgage broker on LinkedIn, you can probably tell why no one's Googling that, nor will they believe me. But yeah, I think your niche is really important, and that's when you talk to realtors. They'll be like, "Hey, how's it going?" And look, they have a long-standing relationship with someone, even if they're a couple years in, or maybe maybe it's a more fragile one. It's important to qualify that and be direct around that. As like, who's your go-to? And I try to say, look, 1 + 1 = 3, right? The way that we both win is if our joint experience is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So that's when you tell them, hey, like, you're a matchmaker, I'm a matchmaker. The better we matchmake clients and they have a team around them, I say you build a moat around them. Because what's a pain point for realtors when they're working on a lead for years, and by chance the lead is not ready to buy, and they meet another realtor or another mortgage broker at a dinner table party, and then boom, they lose them. So you want to position around their pains of losing clients, but also you want to be upfront around like what makes you different. So hey, I'm from Mexico City. I speak Spanish. How many Latin clients do you have? Like, no matter who their broker is, they probably don't speak Spanish. And if you have some of those value props, and they're already gonna put you on their roster, right? So think about like what makes you different. And like again, like I talked about like categorical differentiation, commercial mortgage broker, Spanish speaking, even your background, like, came from tech and marketing. They're going to think, yeah, whose energy is going to match Paul's, number one, and whose specific need is going to match Paul's. And the more you're upfront about that, I think the better. And yeah, I think that on top of pitching that relative to their pain points of clients leaving, clients being uneducated, and then yes, saying like, look, I'm sure you've talked to lots of brokers, and look, sometimes the busiest brokers unfortunately are the ones that make your clients feel like the biggest number, because they're so busy, they're too busy for their own good. If you say little things like that which insinuate they're bad at communication, that's where I think you've got someone who's like, oh wow, this person understands me and they understand my pain points, that I lose clients sometimes because of circumstance. And if they're basically a salesperson for me, that's ideal. And you guys talked about, I mean, I did this too in my early days. Is I called up realtors. I had all the time in the world, and I said, "Hey, who are your leads? I'm going to call them all up." And unlike what you guys recommended, I had a realtor who had like leads that were way past 6 months. So spun on my wheels a bit, but that's when you get to learn your sales pitch, and that's
Yeah.
why it's probably better to work on existing leads. Let's call them even like tire kickers before you pay for lead gen, because it's all about how fast on the spot you can again differentiate yourself and do the same sort of process I talked about with realtors. So anyway, just some things there around differentiating yourself and speaking to the realtor's pains and making them really bucket you as just categorically different. And then the rest of it is just how, again, the communication piece and like the hustle piece. That's just through your actions. So that's when you have to get a CRM, do have a cadence of follow ups. When you follow up, it's not just like, hey, how's your day? Got deals for me? It's like, hey, I just saw that in the US, they're going to be doing this with their rates. And because the stock market is at a huge bull market, that means that bond rates have to go up, which means fixed rates have to go up, which then means if you have clients who have, existing pre-approvals that are expiring, they should probably refresh it ASAP, because here's why there's a leading indicator that they're going to go up again. And that, by the way, could ruin your chances of getting a deal done. Why? Because then people qualify for less. They're more demotivated. So it's always back to like helping them protect their client, and make sure the client transacts. So anyways, I could talk about it forever.
Yeah.
So thanks for bearing with
No,
me,
it's
but
funny.
it's super important.
Because you're speaking our lingo, and I literally just sent out that email this morning to the realtor partner, so I'm laughing internally.
Love
But
it.
yeah, no, it's funny because you can't just say like, "I'm good at communication," even though that is their pain point, communication
Mhm.
with brokers. You can't lead with that because everyone else says the same thing. It's like, okay, well, it's so bland. Whereas like you're really just packaging it in a different way, but you're still talking about communication. So I love that. To circle back a little bit on the VA portion, like if I'm someone, this is kind of like a selfish question because I've been doing a deep dive
Mhm.
into hiring a VA, is if
Mhm.
you wanted to hire a VA to do email inbox management and even some of like the document collections, obviously they can't
Mhm.
do any underwriting because they're not licensed.
Mhm.
But if you
Mhm.
wanted them to do those sort of tasks, like what's like your first step on hiring a VA? Like where can you go to get that person?
Yeah, great question. And if people do hit me up later, I have a little like 2-page document exactly on using either some agencies in Latin America. There's some websites to hire from the Philippines. Of course, the biggest one everyone knows about is Upwork.
Yeah.
But there's many other ways beyond Upwork. But yeah, there's certain sites and even certain agencies that are, they're pretty generous with what they take. So for example, a certain agency will probably take a month's worth of income, which could just be a few $100. And if they got it all dialed in, it could save you a ton of time. So
Yeah.
don't be afraid to outsource. And then you've got, of course, websites where, yeah, you put up a job posting and you get a bunch of applications, and you got to be really organized on how you filter that. But yeah, there's a lot of it. Yeah, and for you, like the one thing about virtual assistants or overseas fractional, workers is you gotta understand the cultural nuances of like how they're motivated, obviously, and it is different between, let's say, the Philippines and Latin America. Any person you hire, when they're fractionalized, you're not the most important thing in the world, even if they're full time, right? They've got other things. So you got to be really clear on their role, and just, be really generous with your time and your training. And you always want to like offer above market, right? 20-25%, which might be, instead of $6, you're doing $8, right? So you have to be kind of, just think that through, instead of, thinking, okay, well, they're in a less expensive country, which means obviously you're doing it to save money. But if you're really pushing that, then your dollar per hour actually goes down because you're spending so much time training someone to do something you could have done yourself. That's the threshold where you've essentially, it's not worth your time. Any kind of delegation, right? So yeah, for you trying to do those tasks, a lot of people do fulfill that. And I think usually they're best suited in the Philippines. But the thing I don't like about that they're 14 hours ahead of you if
Yeah,
if
true.
you're in BC,
Yeah.
right? So that for me is a problem for communication. Yes, you're asleep, they're awake, vice versa, so they can manage it. But I have someone in Latin America running my inbox because there's so many time sensitive things that
Right.
they just got to be on it. You got to be able to Slack them and they respond. So, just some quick things that I've seen is like, ways to manage it and also find them, of course. And if I can ask, how have you started the process? And maybe you've got some things you've already you got rolling that we can dissect.
We originally started with our old company, Leadvine. We are running an agency for mortgage brokers, and
Oh,
we
there you go.
originally
Nice.
went
Yeah.
into, I forget the company name, but they had VAs that they hired, and they were trained on the
Mhm.
CRM platform that we were using. So we
Nice.
originally went into that. We had them develop websites for us and everything. But then
Mhm.
recently, I started transitioning to think of like someone that can help us with like even social media or email
Mhm.
inbox. And there's a I forget the site. I think it's literally called like VA for Hire or something like that. It's one of the
Right.
bigger ones. And it's just like
Mhm.
a bit overwhelming when you go to it because like, do I hire part-time? Do I hire full-time? Should I hire from the Philippines? Like
Mhm.
all the things you just discussed were kind of
Sure.
my the thing that was getting in the way of really doing a deep dive on it. So we'll put a link to
Mhm.
that two-page document for all the
Sure.
listeners too, because I think that could be helpful.
Totally. Happy to. But yeah, the quick answer there too. I think, look, you can start minimum, I believe, for social media, 10 hours a week. What are they going to do there? Hopefully, you have a content calendar template. You're planning your content. You have a basic process to teach them what kind of captions are useful, and they can just look at your social media and hopefully mimic that. with the help of ChatGPT, you can, have them use that for grammar and to also mimic your tone, etc. And then really just about them. I think the biggest skill you want there is, are they good at using Canva?
Yeah.
Half of social media is just design. So they have to be good at Canva and basically good attention to detail. That's it. 10 hours a week, that's enough for them to, do a few posts a week, even 2 posts a week. And the cadence I like to have of my team is, we're always a quarter ahead, so 3 months ahead. So, right now we're filming in February. We've scheduled everything till end of March, and we're about to finish April, May, June. A skeleton content calendar. So just like bare minimum, 2 posts a week, and they're already starting to think about certain posts for that. And this is again maybe getting a bit off topic, but it's all about content repurposing, right? So if you can get onto YouTube and do like one YouTube video per month, super basic, and that could even be like this interview could be a YouTube video. I mean, it obviously is going to
It
be,
will be,
but then
yeah.
yeah, right. So then you repurpose that using a tool like Opus,
Yeah.
etc. And then you cut that up and you spread it out and just repurpose is the big thing, and you can get way ahead. And these are like just your skeleton, like evergreen content. Of course, as the weeks and months go by, if you're checking articles every day, you're then like, ad hoc, grabbing an article and putting it into a slider on Canva. And they've got to be good at just like doing the skeleton, the evergreen content, following some kind of a process there. And then, yeah, proactively, as you see an interesting article, pulling out a quote, being like, hey, put that into our Canva template. And that's where the communication is important. But 10 hours a week can do most of that. And you don't have to post every day. I think you can do like bare minimum, even like 2 posts a week shows you have a pulse, and
Yeah.
it builds your brand. How many leads will you get through social media just on that topic? Probably not a lot. It's more of just like a branding tool,
Yeah,
which I think, by
exactly.
the way, target market are your referral partners. Very few clients are on social media. Anyways, I'm going on a tangent on marketing, but it is related to what you're doing. So hopefully that's
Yeah.
helpful.
No, that's great. And we say the same thing. Like social media, we do it more as a, if a client looks us up, to know that we're still active and relative to what they're
Hmm.
looking for. But
Hmm.
also we're mainly using it as a magnet for lead partners. So um, I think that's great. And prior to hitting record today, you had a quick framework that you kind of shared with us. I believe you called it the DAO method. Can you
Hmm.
just give a quick overview? I love frames because you can apply it to scenarios very quickly and get a quick result. So, can you just share a
Hmm.
little bit with the listeners on that one?
Sure thing. So DAO stands for Delegate, Automate, and Outsource. And I came up with it when, Web3 was really at a big craze. I think, and it's coming back. And, people are building DAOs and communities, which I think is actually really interesting. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. That's for a different podcast. But yeah, like I was thinking, like, everyone's chasing these like cool new technologies and models. What about the basics of improving your relative income? Delegate, we've talked about. If you have an internal staff or a fractional helper, delegate things that are not in your zone of genius. Just a side note, I recently went on this Clifton Strengths Finder. It's something that shows you your top 5 strengths. There's many personality tests. This one's actually very good and tailored towards executives, and very good if you have a partner or a teammate. Basically, what are your 5 biggest strengths? It's about, I think it's like $30 Canadian, takes you half an hour. That is a extremely eye-opening thing because you get to differentiate your, let's put it this way, the strengths that are easy as walking between the strengths that are easy as breathing. And that's a big differentiation because the thing with the strengths that are as easy as breathing for you, you have to eventually be purely in that zone. For example, one for me, like I'm pretty good at sales, but I don't know if that's my breathing strength per se. And eventually, if I want to really scale, I got to hire a sales team and not be like I'm the only one doing sales. So by the way, that's super important for understanding what to delegate. Automate. I mean, look, we haven't talked too much around Blue CRM. From Tom Hall and the gang in Toronto. Shout out to them. They're awesome. It's been cool to see how they've expanded. Set up your drip campaigns. There's so many things you can just automate to some degree, and it's going to give people that really quick communication that's important, right? Um, and the last thing is outsource. And that's not the same thing as delegate or automate. That's actually hiring an outside agency who can help you cruise through the learning curve fast. They're professionals. There's limited handholding, and they're going to get to a result faster than you, even if it hurts a bit upfront to pay for. So yeah, delegate to an internal team member. automate through your CRM and through various different tactics. We talked about ChatGPT, we talked about LinkedIn automation, and then outsource. Find like a really value-added agency or contractor that can just own something that is not exactly on your team.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great framework to take to anything you're trying to solve in your business.
Totally. Yeah. Thanks for asking about that.
Paul, do you have anything that you think the listeners should know about outsourcing, delegating, like the whole framework we just talked about? Or
I mean, we covered a lot. I think as a call to action, we mentioned my podcast or our podcast, Grind Less, Flow More. If you do download that on Spotify, Apple, even Amazon, there's some cool heavyweights on there that are realtors, mortgage brokers, and of course, lots of coaches and best-selling authors. Tune into that, and there are some episodes that really directly address that and do go very deep. So that's an obvious call to action to go deeper. Obviously, also on levelupmortgages.com, that way you can find how to get in touch with me, which I'm sure will also be linked. And yeah, we do have some. You can if you want reverse engineer a bit of our process there, and you can start to see how we're recruiting both for marketing staff, but also we are growing our broker team. So get in touch. And lastly, look, I mean, follow us on social media, and if there's specific questions, I'm happy to provide other links that either are within Level Up Mortgages or with our marketing agency. And there's a lot more to deep dive in. But I hope today people at least have, out of your large priority list, hopefully one or two things that were somewhere on that list but not yet acted on have they've gone up the list because you've seen it's maybe a bit easier than you thought. And you've got more direction. And that's huge, right? Just prioritize that and just start with one thing. But yeah, in general, I think we've covered a lot. And maybe to summarize, like just step at a time. But remember, like the best way you will grow sustainable income, higher dollar per hour, less or zero burnout, is going to be figuring out your strengths, being a broker, which is really the person that needs to just guide people to clarity and conviction, and then slowly but surely, after you've done it yourself to some extent, is starting to delegate, automate, and outsource parts of the process so you can be of more service to people that just want communication and someone to hold their hand. That's the best way I would summarize it. And to get there, it is all about systems. You have to decide whether you are a systems person. And if you're not, join a team that's got the dialed in. Now, you guys are big on systems. I'm big on systems. Just be honest with yourself. Who can support you in that journey? But you do have to have some basic systems, or else you will be a victim to your own success. And that's where I think a lot of brokers and banks are the best example. They're victim of their own success. They barely have time to process an application, let alone provide any level of education. And as a differentiator, it's all about educational selling. And the more you show that and you walk the walk with, of course, your referral partners, but starting with your clients and really dial in that customer journey, you will be in a good position and you will grind less and flow more. You will be able to work from New York or Austin, Texas, or Mexico City with a 1 or 2 hour time difference and like have a really interesting life. I mean, this is a great profession. I mean, wow. We don't have to go knock on doors as much, although I think that is important. And we can work remotely and have a good quality of life, but you got to have systems. And that's sort of, in my journey moving to Toronto, and then even just how I ended up as a broker. It was systems, bringing in people, having confidence, changing your environment, physical and digitally and socially. And all those things are going to help you level up. So anyways, I hope that summary can help your audience and our fellow brokers grind a little bit less and flow a little bit more. And I'm super grateful that the two of you had me on. So thank you for having me. And Tom and Brandon, I'll be actively continuing to listen to your journey. And I'm sure there's a lot of ways we can collaborate with yourself in the community.
Awesome. I appreciate it, Paul. It was great to have you. I know I'm going to be writing down that framework. I always write it down on painter's tape and stick it on my wall. So it's going to go over there because
not on that new wall, buddy.
Not on the new wall, on the other wall. But, thank you for joining us. It was a real treat to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Thank you. It was a joy to be here. Flow well, and we'll talk super soon.